I know you are as excited as I am to hear the next two presentations. I will remind you that we are happy to field questions at any time at the college by email. For those of you who are watching online or watching with YouTube, please also feel free to forward any questions you might have to us. So this will conclude the official end of our business meeting. Thank you for your attention. I now have the pleasure of introducing Beth Deazeley, our Registrar and CEO, to come up, and she will bring with her tonight's panel. And I will just hand it over to Beth and say thanks.
Yes. There we go. Perfect. Good evening, everyone. I'm delighted to greet everybody who's here in the room this evening and everybody who's participating online. Now that we've finished the business portion of the meeting, we have two very special presentations for you. The second one, which I can't wait for either, is by Dr. Jean Clinton, and we're really excited to have her here this evening. But before we get to that, we as members of the college's leadership team wanted to take just a few minutes to talk to you about some of the college's current initiatives that we're incredibly excited about. And it all really relates to this concept that really guides so much of what we do, which is RECEs as professionals and leaders. So I'm pleased to introduce to you the following members of the college's leadership team. Cynthia Abel is our Director of Registration and Member Services. Melanie Dixon is our Director of Professional Practice. And Marc Spector, our Director of Professional Regulation. Well, most of you probably know Melanie, who's one of the college's longest-serving employees and spends a huge portion of her time out in the community with you. We wanted to give you a chance to meet the rest of us and to give you some insight into the different areas of the college's work and why it matters to you as professionals. These are some of the key concepts in professionalism that are recognized by the college. And you can see that if we removed the picture of our friendly early childhood educator, we could replace that with a doctor or a lawyer or any other professional, and the concepts there would be equally applicable because they're what distinguishes a professional from somebody who does a job. The first concept is the concept of professional judgment, which really refers to the application of knowledge, skills, and expertise combined with your own critical thinking to make decisions in the best interests of the individuals that you serve. Ethics reflects the fact that professionals are in a special position of trust and that their decisions and advice can have a significant effect on those that they serve and on their communities. There will be times when, as professionals, you are tested and when the right decision will not be the easy one. A professional is distinguished by the fact that they have a personal commitment to their code of ethics, which transcends situational pressures. The second concept is the concept of accountability. Because of their special skills and their trusted position, professionals are given the exclusive right to use a professional designation and to work in certain areas of practice. In exchange for that, they're accountable to the public and to their colleagues through self-regulation. The college and us as college staff are simply the mechanism by which you as the profession hold yourselves accountable to each other. There are few places left in the world where professionals have the trust of the public and the government to allow them to regulate themselves. And there are a number of professions, even here in Canada, who have lost that trust and therefore the right to self-regulation. So that accountability is critical to what it means to be a professional. The third concept is reflective practice. And engaging in reflective practice helps educators continue to align what they actually do each day as professionals with the values that they hold. And that is a critical component of the next concept, which of course is ongoing professional learning that Melanie will be talking to us more about. And all of the above are key components in the final concept listed here, which is that of quality service that is delivered in accordance with recognized standards of practice. When we talk about leadership, one definition that we particularly like at the college is this one. It's the idea that a leader is someone who can work with and empower others to join together to improve the quality of diverse education and care settings for children and families. The discussion around the concept of leadership in early learning and care has grown exponentially in recent years, so much so that I now have a whole shelf in my office filled with books on exactly that subject. And as the understanding of the concept has evolved in the field, in the sector, in the profession, it's evolved for us as well at the college. We spent a lot of time in the past year talking about leadership, and it was reflected in events like the leadership pilot projects and the symposium. So this evening, we'll talk about a number of aspects of the college's work and how it supports you as professionals and as leaders, and why that is critical to the college's fundamental mandate, which is to protect the public interest. So first, turn it over to Cynthia, who will talk to us about the concept of practice readiness.
Thanks, Beth. So just before I get into actually trying to define what we mean when we use the term practice readiness, I just thought we'd situate this conversation just within our core mandate, which is again about serving and protecting the public. So everything that we do as an organization is looked through that lens. We have standards of practice because we believe that those are the important things that we need to fulfill that function. We also have a complaints and discipline process, which Marc will talk a little bit more from the lens, that lens, and a public register where every member of the college's name appears. We also set registration requirements, and that's at the time when you first enter the profession, enter the practice. And for members, you will recognize these requirements. This is all what you filled in when you filled in your first application form. What we're looking for is, are you eligible to work in Canada? Do you meet those educational requirements to practice the profession? Do you meet language fluency requirements, and are you of good character? And that's really what we're looking at. Those requirements have remained relatively unchanged since we started the college 8 years ago. And I'm really pleased that Council has approved us to move forward to start to look at that a little bit differently and look at it through a lens of what we're calling practice readiness. So what does it really and truly mean to be ready to practice the profession from the first day that you start? And our organizing concept is really around this triangle, where we're looking at, is the individual safe? Do they have technical competencies? And are they professional? And we'll explore the term professional in different lights in just a moment. But that's really our organizing frame for that. At the very bottom level and the foundational level, I would say, is do we have confidence that that individual is actually safe to work with children? What assurances do we have in place that those practitioners won't put children or families at risk of physical, psychological harm or neglect? Do we feel confident about that? And that's a pretty weighty decision to be able to make at that entry to practice time. But beyond that, we're also thinking about, do they have those are they technically competent? Do they have those technical capacity to be able to fulfill the functions of the role? What assurances do we have that they meet, that they have the knowledge and the skills and the attitudes to be able to practice that profession within a current context? Ontario, as we heard the minister talk earlier tonight, is under a huge amount of change, not just in the education and early years sector, but in the broader children's sector, and I would say in society as a large. What are the assurances we have that that individual can actually function within that context right now? And that's what we mean when we're thinking about being technically competent. And then finally, looking at this through the lens of what assurances do we have that that individual has the ability to be a professional and to use that title appropriately. And really what we're looking at there is, do they demonstrate the sorts of attitudes and values of the profession? Do they practice ethically? Do they set aside their personal biases in making decisions? And are they always thinking of the best interest of children, families, and society as a broader whole? And it's in putting those three things together where you get to the concept of practice readiness. So this is a huge piece of work that we're just starting to undertake. You'll be hearing more and more about this as we move forward through it, but it is looking at, from the very first time you become a member of the college and register, what that looks like. Are you practice ready? And why are we doing this? Really, from a family's perspective, this is what we would want to hear the families in Ontario say, is that I trust these professionals with my children. They're safe and they're knowledgeable and they're qualified, and they create caring, learning environments that support good outcomes for children. And that's really what our focus is. I'm going to turn it over to Melanie, who's going to talk a bit more about CPL.
Okay, merci Cynthia, bonsoir. All right, so College Council has a vision that all members will strive for practice excellence. And we know that RECEs have always valued lifelong learning. How can we not, as educators, undertake to continue our own professional growth and development? What you have up on the screen, it actually sort of reflects what is currently in our Code of Ethics and Standards of Practice, but it's actually inputting some new language for us. It's actually excerpts from our existing draft proposed revisions to the Code of Ethics and Standards of Practice, which are currently being reviewed, and Beth's going to talk about that a little later on. But RECEs value lifelong learning and reflective practice and engage in the continuous professional learning program. You're reflective and intentional professionals. You access current evidence-based research and, evidence-informed, shout out to Jason, evidence-informed practice, and are able to transfer this knowledge into practice. You engage in critical reflection, collaborative inquiry, and demonstrate commitment to ongoing learning by engaging in the CPL program. We know that reflective practice and ongoing learning, they're linked. You can't continue your learning without reflecting on your own practice and what's going on and what you're doing, what others are doing, what the children are doing and saying, and all of that lovely piece that is that reflective practice. And that impacts our level of professionalism, leadership, and accountability. Because again, we know that leadership and learning, those play in together. And if we're leaders and we're learners, we're accountable to our behavior and to our practice. It is sort of whatever, I don't know what the positive word would be, or the concept around a vicious circle. However, it's a good thing. Virtuous. Oh, see, I learned something new tonight. So it's a virtuous circle, and I'll reflect on or mention something that Lois said in part of her own learning she shared with me and others, is that as you engage in continuous professional learning, you gain competence, which in turn enhances your confidence. And in enhancing your confidence, you feel more wanting and willing again to continue to engage for your competence, so on and so forth. All of that really, if we're demonstrating and acting with a high level of professionalism and leadership and integrity and accountability in our practice, we're going to have an impact on the quality of the services that we're providing. And the public has an interest in that. They want us to avoid harm. We know the important role and the impact that we have on children. That impacts the outcomes, and that is in the public interest. So this is a document, the notice regarding the continuous professional learning requirements for RECEs. I filled out my renewal form today, and for those of you who have done so since, yes, I'm about to hand it in. So I'm due for renewal, and as you renew this year, you'll note that it's drawing your attention to this notice, because it is your turn, your time, our time to engage in this mandatory program. The CPL regulation, again, as a highlight for me in 2016 was actually seeing that new regulation come into force on January 1st. We had been working toward that goal since 2011, as soon as we published the ethical and professional standards. And the program is designed for our RECEs to reflect on their professional practice growth and leadership development in the context of our professional and ethical standards, and will help us in further understanding the new code of ethics and standards of practice that will be in force later on this summer. I am so excited about the potential that this program and the engagement of RECEs, think about it, 50,000 members a year having to come up with 3 goals around their professional learning. And even if they're small little goals, the potential for growth there and the sharing of those goals with other people who in turn will say, hey, you're focused on this aspect of programming. I saw a cool article, or so-and-so over at that center is doing this. The potential for growth is amazing, which in turn, and I know that just based on the people who were involved in the first 2 leadership pilots and the stories that I've heard around those who've engaged already in the voluntary version of the CPL program, that the potential for growth in our profession, which in turn is going to impact the children and the families and our colleagues in our communities. So yes, looking forward to engaging further with you in your learning. Professionalism.
Good evening, everyone. I am often asked 3 questions, and they are, what do I get for my $150 membership fee? Right after that, I get asked, well, what do you do? And I can answer those 2 questions with these simple 2 lines. The fact is that everyone wants those RECEs who fall below the college's expectations, those who engage in professional misconduct, to be held accountable. I think we can all agree on that. But wait, there's more that you get for your $150. They also want those people who pretend to be RECEs, the fake ones out there. They want them stopped. That is what we do, and that is what you get for your $150. The third question I get is, what kind of cases do you get? And that comes back to our topic about professionalism in being a leader. So let's first talk about those RECEs that fall below the college's expectations. You heard earlier from our chair of the complaints committee saying we often see 3 themes in the cases we receive: inadequate supervision and inappropriate discipline or behavior management. But the third theme that we tend to see is about unprofessionalism. And you recall that slide we saw earlier on in Beth's presentation of an RECE, and it could be any professional. It could be a doctor, a lawyer, a real estate agent, or an accountant. The kinds of things you see for unprofessional behavior cross professional boundaries, but they can be categorized typically in one of 2 ways. We see a lot of use of social media, perhaps inappropriately so, and we see a lot of what we call so-called off-duty conduct, because you'll see we have air quotes, because there's no such thing as truly being off-duty when you're a registered professional and when you're an RECE. So let's provide some examples. This is all theoretical. What's some real-life things that we've all seen in the last few months that might help give us an idea about what we're talking about. So first I want to introduce you to this case. This is a very sad one. It involves a nurse in Saskatchewan. And her grandfather was gravely ill. He was in palliative care. And he was in a long-term care facility. And she loved her grandfather very, very much, and she knew he was suffering at the end. She also happened to be a registered nurse. And she had concerns about the care her grandfather was getting during his final moments. And she expressed those concerns on her personal Facebook page. She wrote such things as the care he was getting was subpar, that she, as a warning to other caregivers at the facility, please do better next time. She asked the question, do you really care about the people you work for or care for? And then she asked, I challenge the people involved in decision-making, please get all your staff a refresher on this topic and more. So here's what happened. That staff, those people who were the subject of these comments, they made a complaint to the regulator for nurses in Saskatchewan. And there was a discipline hearing. There was an allegation that this nurse engaged in professional misconduct by making these comments on Facebook. And she was found guilty. The nurse argued in her defense, this is my private Facebook page. I was doing this as a grieving granddaughter and not as a nurse. And the regulator disagreed. They said there is no such thing as off-duty conduct. When you're a professional, you're always a professional 24/7. The staff, they felt humiliated and embarrassed by these comments. And the regulator said if professionals want to engage in the use of social media, they have to do so in a professionally responsible way. So that was a concern about this nurse, and it could apply to any profession, including RECEs. But it's not just about nurses in Saskatchewan. Here's a case a little bit closer to home. And this has also just happened last month. And although not involving professionals, the lesson that we can learn from it is equally applicable. This is an unfortunate case involving a bunch of university students, specifically members of a student union, representing 5,000 students at St. Michael's University. And what they were doing is they were passing around a book at a party called Islam for Dummies. And they were quoting verses from this book, and they were engaging in other insulting-like behavior. What they didn't know is that somebody was videotaping it secretly without their permission, and that video made its way onto Snapchat, onto Twitter and Facebook, and eventually the media. And you'll see it made it right into our daily news, but actually also the Toronto Star. And the president of St. Michael's University probably said it better than I could, or more elegantly and thoughtful, so I'm going to quote from him. He said, "You don't really have a private persona. You have a public persona if you're associated with government." I said to the students, "Be sure that your use of social media doesn't hurt the people that you serve and doesn't hurt the institution that you serve." That president was speaking to these students, but he could very well have been speaking to every one of our over 50,000 RECEs. But that's not the only case. Here is one that you probably heard of within the last few months, but involves the head of the Toronto District School Board. I came up with a slightly different graphic. And what he is said to have done is write a bunch of editorial pieces for the Toronto Star. And through some digging, there were allegations that large portions of those pieces were actually plagiarized. And that led some reporters to do some even more digging. And that led to allegations that this teacher had also plagiarized portions of their doctoral thesis. But this person also happened to be a teacher himself. And ultimately, just last November, this person was found guilty of professional misconduct by the College of Teachers for behavior that he engaged in, one, while a student, and two, while writing articles for the Toronto Star. So all that is to say, we're all professionals in this room. We're always professionals, and we will be when we leave this room as well. But wait, there's more. That is about members who fall below the college's expectations. But we also are doing quite a bit to deal with fake ECEs. And we do a lot. And to learn more about that, I strongly encourage you to take a look at our Connections article, which talks about exactly what we do and what we have done. And to elaborate more, and you can also see it ties in with the message of leadership and actually getting rid of our membership cards and focusing people on the register, because it is the most recent, up-to-date, and accurate information you can get to find out about the professionals who are registered. So I hope that's helpful. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, and to wrap up our presentation, I'm just going to speak to you briefly about how we're reflecting leadership in the revisions to the Code of Ethics and Standards of Practice. So the Code and Standards are actually a really interesting reflection of how we think about leadership in the profession. Having an ethical code and standards, it's a hallmark of a profession. It gives you a snapshot of what that profession is about and what those professionals stand for. So the Code of Ethics sets out the 4 ethical values that sit above and they guide the practice of ECEs. The Standards of Practice outline more specific expectations regarding knowledge, skills, and actions in 6 key areas. And the Code and the Standards are interconnected, and taken together, they support RECEs in using their professional judgment and making ethical decisions in their daily practice. The Code and Standards were released in February 2011. They were developed over a period of 2 years. They involved expert advice and an exhaustive consultation process. And that Code and Standards continue in force, and they guide the profession today. And currently, the word leader does not appear in them, which is why we're so excited about the revisions that are being made, because that's about to change. As I'm sure you know, the college is currently midway through with a 5-year review of the Code and Standards. We consulted with RECEs from across the province and got expert input. Revisions have been drafted, and those are currently undergoing further consultation with the profession. Many of you have participated in those discussions with us, and for that we thank you. Your input has been incredibly helpful. Some of the changes that we're most excited about, though, relate to leadership. The Code of Ethics and its 4 principles sets out in broad strokes the responsibilities of registered early childhood educators. And in the revised Code of Ethics, for the first time, leadership is recognized as part of an REC's responsibility to the profession. Turning to the Code and Standards, Standard 4 has been renamed and revised. It was previously Professional Knowledge and Competence. It is now Professionalism and Leadership, to reflect the importance of that concept. And at the bottom there, it contains this incredibly important statement, which is one that we want to ensure is heard, understood, and internalized by all members of the profession. And that is that all registered early childhood educators, regardless of position or title, are leaders. So at the college, it's our privilege to protect the public interest by developing and supporting all of you as professionals and leaders, and we thank you for the opportunity to engage with you this evening. Now I am pleased to turn the microphone back over to Lois, who will introduce Dr. Jean Clinton.